Another topic that I want to address is that of classism. And as someone who was born and raised in Barbados, I know a lot about classism. Barbados has a lot of different little classes. And it's again one of those ones like religion where you're not supposed to speak about it or you're not supposed to speak about it aloud. But the thing is that I think that people need to understand, for those who don't understand, and there are some people who definitely do understand, the effect that classism has on your future. And it's not only a case of you inheriting your money habits because of some of it, but it's also a case of when you look to your future, do you see yourself as someone who can grow wealth within the country in which you are living in? Or do you see yourself as someone who has to work harder than everyone else because you were born in a working class environment? And one of the reasons why people talk about the US and some of these other territories so much is that there are places out there where it doesn't matter which class you were born into, you have the opportunity to rise above that as long as you are willing to work hard and do whatever it takes. But in the Caribbean society, there is this ideology that you are supposed to die within the class system that you were born in. So if you were born in a working class environment and you have worked yourself to either a middle class or even to the higher level, there will always be those barriers that would be there, and they are not there for everyone. They are there specifically to keep you within your box and to keep you within your class. And there are some people who recognize this, and there are some people who are working, or what I would say, coloring outside of it. But there's also a large persons that even when they have worked hard enough and they have now moved themselves to middle class or upper middle class or whatever we are making up these days, they feel the need to always hide and diminish their light because they don't want someone to come and bring them back down. It's also where we found, or where we talk about, the crabs in a barrel mentality. But then let's look at also the money side of it. And sometimes what I do see with persons in terms of their spending and how they are allocating their monies and the reason why they are in debt, or persons who have really good jobs, but if you look, or if you know, behind the fancy cars and all this stuff, they're actually broke. They're living paycheck to paycheck regardless of how big their salaries are. And it is because they have not been able to understand how the class that they were born into relates to their current life. So for example, you have someone who may have been raised middle class, especially for those persons who were raised middle class, let's say in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. They would have gone to private schools and all that stuff. And they are of the opinion that that's where they are now in life. But the world is a lot more expensive. And they find themselves struggling to pay for that same private education for their now offsprings. As I had mentioned in one of the chapters in my book, the class in which you were born into, that is your parents' lifestyle. That is not your lifestyle. You now have to go out there and earn that for yourself. I made a comment quite recently to someone that as much as we've spent time talking about financial literacy in the Caribbean, it sometimes feels as if we're not making any ground. And I know that there are some governments that have thrown some money behind some programs to have the population be more financially literate. And even those programs have not been met with great success. And one of the things that I wanted to make certain when I wrote my book and released it 2 years ago was that I covered the things that other finance books that you would find in the domain, especially in the US or even in the UK, that they would not have covered as it relates to the Caribbean experience. And one of the things that people don't really recognize is that money habits are really instilled in us from a very young age. There are very few persons who will see certain things happening around them as a child and then as an adult be completely going into the opposite direction unless they have spent a lot of time making certain that they have put in the work for that to happen. And as you get into our own money story as Caribbean people, we cannot ignore the history of the plantocracy era, which is why I made certain that I wrote a whole chapter on that. But one of the other things that led me actually to the plantocracy era chapter was the chapter on religion. And let me say, I know a lot about religion, and I know a lot about religion in the Caribbean. And when you start to speak about religion in the Caribbean, or as a matter of fact, you're not supposed to speak about Caribbean religion or religion as it relates to money at all. These are things that just do not come in the same conversation. So I made certain that I did a proper deep dive and research on religion and its role in our money story. And that was where the chapter came about in the book. But when I got to the bottom of that research and what I found, I recognized that there was nothing in the history of religion that should suggest that Caribbean people should be poor, peaceful, and polite, and that we should be dwelling in sufferation. As I've also traversed the world, and I've traveled the whole world, one of the things that I always do is that I make certain that I go to churches, predominantly Christian churches all over the world. Massive churches in Hong Kong, wherever I go, as long as the service is in English, I will partake. And what I find is that their ideologies of religion, as it relates to money and living, and I'm not talking about flashy living and not mega churches with people doing bad financial things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about religion as in just pure religion. They do not believe in this sufferation. The research that I did, and as I said, I've placed a whole chapter in the book on it. A lot of it guides you to a point where you have to really question, where did our foreparents get the ideas that they have about religion and money? Because the research, there was nothing to suggest that. And if you have a copy of the book, get your copy of the book. You could go and read it for yourself. But based on that research was then how I really had to dig into the plantocracy era, because what it really pushed me towards was that religion was not the issue. It was really the plantocracy era. You may have heard the term aligning your money to your lifestyle or to who you are as a person, and you may not be 100% certain what that actually means. When I speak about aligning my money to who I am as a person, I mean that I'm spending money in areas that benefit me, areas that make me happy, and those things that I want to spend my money on, and not what society thinks I should be spending my money on. Now, of course, I don't want to spend my money on utilities. I don't want to spend my money on water and garbage collection that doesn't even happen and all those things. Those are, adult expenses. But when we speak about the rest of your money, like your residual money after the basic bills and those have been taken care of, where is that money going? Are you spending it in areas that you want to spend it on, or are you spending it in areas that society wants you to spend that money on? So for example, two of the things that I have in my budget that are for me, who I am as a person, one will be my travel budget. I've always had a line item in my budget for the last 10 years or so for travel. So I don't just get up and decide I'm going to do 4 trips this year. No, I already knew that before I came into the year. So how that works is that depending on what is happening that year, I then decide, okay, this is how much residual income I have. This is the things that I need to get done. This is what I want to do. I think this year I can take maybe 3 trips, maybe 1 major trip, and then 2 weekend trips, etc., depending on where I was living at the time. And I know I would set a budget for that. And that way, you're working towards that. You know that you're going to put aside that money when the month come or when the week come, because you have that trip coming up, but it's also in your budget. And you can determine what that value looks like. Whether it is a one trip that you're taking, maybe it's $3,000, $5,000, $10,000, $50,000, whatever you decide that you want to put aside based on what you know that you can financially do and still be financially responsible, as in saving money and paying all your bills. The second category that is a must in my budget is personal care. And I don't mean nails and hairdos and those type of things. I mean personal care that comes with looking after my body. So whether it is top-ups on doctor visits, not your traditional doctor visits, but I have different specialists that I use to keep my health intact, which most insurance in the Caribbean don't cover. So I have to look after that. I also spoke about the fact that a monthly massage is also part of that. I do not see it as a luxury. It is partially to keep my body intact. And also things like specialist supplements that I take, not your traditional going to the supermarket, buy this, or your pharmacist and buy this. And because those things are very important for me to be able to keep a healthy lifestyle and for me to look after my body, they are definitely in my budget with their own line item. What line item do you currently have in your budget? Or what line item would you want to put in your budget that really says, I am aligning my money with who I am? Tell me. Let's talk about financial abuse and what that looks like. I think when people think about financial abuse, they just assume, okay, you're in a relationship where someone may steal your money, or you're in a relationship where someone may not give you money, let's say to look after children. Even though I don't think that some people realize that that is also financial abuse. But there are other aspects of financial abuse. And financial abuse doesn't always necessarily have to be in a relationship, like an intimate relationship, let's say man and woman, but financial abuse can also be from children to parents. So if you're a minor and your parents don't actually provide funding for you, let's say for your schooling or your basic needs and those things, even though it's not a case of, let's say, poverty or they don't have it, that is also financial abuse. You can also see financial abuse in relationships where you have a carer, whether it is a family member or whether the carer is someone who comes in from outside of the family to look after an older person or a disabled person or something like that, and they are abusing their resources. So it doesn't always have to be money either. It could be your resources. So it can be things like your house or even things like your car. So if there's an individual who, let's say, take possession of your car all day long, and when you want to use that car, you have to either rely on them or you have to ask their permission, even though the car is yours and you're paying for it, that is also financial abuse. Another aspect of financial abuse that I want to draw to people's attention is when people restrict your ability to earn a living. So, for example, even if you're a minor or an older person and you wanted to do a course or to further your education and you're being restricted from doing that, that is financial abuse. Because what persons are doing is that they're restricting you from this education, which will lead you to either a paycheck or a higher paycheck. So you need to look at that as financial abuse. It can also be in a case where you are restricted from going to work. So whether it is that you're forced to stay home to look after the children because they had said they were going to do it and now they're not going to do it, or whatever stops you from being able to show up on that job to earn that living, that is also financial abuse. So just wanted to pop in quick to say financial abuse looks different for some people, and it's a lot more than just people stealing other people's monies. And you would be surprised that not necessarily everyone who is in a destitute position is in jeopardy of experiencing financial abuse. If you go to work every day, but your paycheck is deposited into your spouse's account because that's what they demand, that is also financial abuse. A few months ago, I was talking to a priest I had just met, and we were talking about financial literacy and standard of living within the Caribbean, etc. And we got on to talking about payday loans. And I mentioned to him that it's my opinion that payday loans are predatory. And he thought that I had a very strong opinion about payday loans. And I told him yes. And I went on to tell him exactly why. Now, payday loans is another thing that I would have covered in my book in depth because of how strongly I feel about them. The first time I saw payday loans and understood the damage that payday loans were going to cause within the Caribbean was actually almost 15 years ago when I first started working with some of the hotels in St. Lucia. And at the time, payday loan companies had now come to the Caribbean. And I don't know if I'm correct in saying that, but I didn't know them from Barbados, but I actually got introduced to them in St. Lucia. And as I would be reviewing the payrolls, I started to realize there and then that these companies were going to be problematic. The thing with payday loans, or how payday loans first came about, or what the purpose of a payday loan was, it was basically small amounts of money that would take you from one paycheck to another. So for example, if you may have had a difficulty and you didn't have any other options, you would take a small $100 bill which you could pay off with your next paycheck. That is what a payday loan was supposed to be. Unfortunately now, payday loans in the Caribbean come up to thousands of dollars, $5,000, $10,000 or whatever. That is not a payday loan because you cannot repay it in your next paycheck. Why I also think that they're very predatory is that they are gauged towards persons who have a smaller paycheck. They are gauged towards those persons who are at the lower level of income within the country, and a lot of times those persons are also at the level where their financial literacy is not where it should be. So because of that, they don't read in between the lines very well. They don't see the rates that these loans are being offered to them at, and that is the main reason why I think they're predatory. But outside of that, what happens is that it puts people in a revolving situation. And because they are paying this loan every week or every bi-weekly, however they get paid, unfortunately now persons are not really able to save anything. So by the time they have finished paying for that loan, the only way that they can cope to continue to live with their living day-to-day expenses is by going back and also taking another loan. So as soon as they come out of one, they're back into another. And it's the same thing with persons who take school loans, Christmas loans, travel loans, and those type of loans. You know, I am a debt-free advocate, and I think people in the Caribbean get very much in their feelings when I say that, or when you speak about debt-free living, because there are a lot of people who think that you cannot pursue debt-free living in the Caribbean, and yes, you can. There's absolutely nothing in the Caribbean that you can buy that you cannot buy it debt-free. And I am proof of that. Houses, cars, whatever, you can buy them debt-free. And I want people to get to the point where we start to reject these loans that are not beneficial. There are companies out there, like the company that used to be a furniture company, that is no longer a furniture company and is a finance company. If you read between the lines and you read like the rates of what they are offering you these loans at, then you will understand why you just need to leave them alone.